Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today we're going to do a quick Q&A. So I got this idea from Nina over at Shuffle Tarot, and if you haven't seen some of hers, I'm going to link them in the description box below because they are such a great idea, because it gives you a chance to ask us some questions and us a chance to kind of share those questions in snippets. So I don't know about Nina, but I get a lot of questions, and I've been trying to figure out like how to make a Q&A style video because I do get so many questions, but if I sat here and answered them all, we would be here for like 5 hours, and I'm sure that would get pretty boring. So I'm going to take my cue from Nina, and I'm going to do just a quick Q&A session every so often. Feel free to leave some other questions in the comments below, and I will add them to my list, and I will try to get through all of them that I can. So my first question comes from Haley, and she asked, do you ever go back to past readings that you have journaled and see it as a different message? Or do you believe that the message you read intuitively in the present moment was the only message intended? So I think that this is a really good question, and one that I definitely wanted to address because I do go back to my old readings for sure, especially if they have to do with a certain situation that maybe hasn't been resolved yet, or that I'm looking to see if the resolution kind of fell in line with my reading. However, I don't think that the message necessarily changes any. I think the message that I get as I get it when I do the reading is the main message. However, my understanding of the message may change. My interpretation of the message may change. Sometimes when we go back to old readings, we have a little bit more distance and a little bit more perspective. So sometimes we can see things that we didn't necessarily note the first time. And sometimes there are things that maybe didn't necessarily make sense or connect the first time around, that when we go back to look at them with that little bit of distance, with that little bit of perspective, then we have kind of a better idea of what maybe that might have meant. So whereas I don't really think that the message necessarily changes, I think the message is still the same message that you received from the time you did the reading. I think that the understanding of the message can change. I think that it can evolve and grow, and sometimes having a little bit of space and perspective from your readings, a little bit of distance from them, can be really helpful in finding new ways and new information and new messages within that message. So I hope that makes sense, Haley. That's kind of how I look at it. I do go back to old readings, and while I don't think the message necessarily changes, I often find new insights into old messages. So moving on to our next question, Dina would like to know, which do you prefer to read, Oracle or Tarot? Do you have a guide or instinct give you the messages? So I definitely prefer Tarot. For me, I really like the structure of Tarot. I really like the balance that is represented in Tarot. And I feel like that gives me the most meaningful messages. What I like to use Oracle for is to kind of expand on those messages or to sum up those messages in some case. So I tend to do my primary readings with Tarot, and then I tend to expand on those with the Oracle. And sometimes I like to use Oracle as a wrap up to a message too, because sometimes it really has a nice cohesive message that kind of just sums up a reading really well. Now, because I primarily read for myself, when I'm doing that, I'm just kind of pulling a sort of wrap up or affirmative message for myself, right? I do also use Oracle cards just as affirmation. So just to pull a card just to get a daily affirmation. I also use them in some of my personal wellness and spiritual practices too. But as far as readings go, I am definitely like a tarot girl. I love tarot. In fact, there are some months where I kind of don't even touch Oracle at all, with the exception of maybe a goddess oracle or a affirmation oracle. For the most part, tarot is my go-to. I really think that the structure really creates a nice balance for my readings, and I've done a lot of work to learn the tarot and to understand it and to cultivate my own sort of language with the tarot, and so it tends to be my go-to. I feel like it represents my inner voice the best, and whereas I feel like Oracle is really for me more of a general wrap up for my readings, or as I said, sometimes for just general affirmations or sometimes for creative prompts too, because I think oracle cards make great creative prompts in terms of writing or drawing or collaging. And so I like to use them for that. But definitely when it comes down to reading, I am tarot all the way most of the time. So as far as guides or instinct, the way that I perceive tarot and the way that I work with tarot personally is that I believe that tarot comes from my inner voice. Now, whether that inner voice is divinely guided, that, I guess remains to be seen. I would like to think that there is some sort of divine cosmic guidance in there, because the way that I personally look at the world and life, that everything is connected, and so that the messages come not only from within me, but from within my soul's inner knowledge, from the divine connection, from the cosmic connection, from all of the ancestors and everybody who's come before me. I feel like all of that gets kind of interwoven into the messages that I receive from the tarot. So for me, it's a little bit of both, I suppose. I do believe there is a little bit of divine guidance, but I believe that is all filtered through my own inner voice to speak to me in a way that makes sense to me. I don't necessarily have a particular ancestor or guide or angel or anything of that nature that I feel gives me the messages, but I feel like it's all intermingled into one, and that they kind of all come together. All the messages flow from kind of like this cosmic pool of knowledge. Be that, collective knowledge from all of the human race, be that from our ancestors, from spirits, from divine, from the cosmos itself. And so I think that kind of all just comes in and together and kind of creates this big pool of knowledge that we all pull from. Again, that's just really my own personal perspective on tarot, and that really relates to really how I see the world, how I experience the world. Because I think a lot of how we experience tarot is a reflection of how we see the world, how we interpret the world, and how we understand the world that we live in, the beings that we are. So for me, tarot is a really kind of a representation or a mirror of how I am in the world. And the messages that I receive from it are kind of filtered through that lens of how I understand things, which is why I think that we can get different interpretations based on who you're talking to, what book you're reading, what deck you're using. And I think that's really wonderful, because I think that the messages, are very cosmic, very macrocosm. But when it comes down to how we each understand, I believe that it's kind of filtered through our own individual lenses so that we can distill it into a way that makes sense for us. So for me, it's a little bit of everything, but it's all filtered in through my own inner voice so that it is presented in a way that I can personally understand. So next, Abigail would like to know, do I read reversals? And I do not at this time. I say not at this time because I did read with reversals for many years, because that was what was always in the book. You always saw the reverse meanings. I didn't really go to any trouble to try to shuffle reversals into my deck, but if they happen, they happen, and I paid attention to them, and I read them in a way that I was taught to read reversals. However, over the last 10 years or so, I've really changed my perspective on reversals, and I don't read with them now, because I feel like as I have come to understand the tarot more in depth, I feel like tarot already has a nice balance in it, and I don't necessarily feel that I personally need reversals in my reading to get the sort of other side of the card, right? So for me, it's more about the context of my reading now, and I understand that all of the cards in the tarot do have a light and shadow meaning, and so I don't feel the need to actually work with reversals, but I know a lot of people do, and I know it's definitely a very respected practice, but I personally just do not, because I just really don't feel that my readings necessarily need it. So for me, it's more about the card's position in the spread and the context of the reading and the other cards around it than it is whether or not the card is upside down or right side up. When I get a reverse card in my reading nowadays, it's usually because I fumbled the shuffling and I just flip it back around. So I don't read reversals at this time, but I did used to, and I think that there's nothing wrong with reading reversals. I know a lot of people do, and I think it really is a wonderful practice, especially when you're learning and you're getting to know the light and shadow meanings of each card. Sometimes having them physically reversed so that you can really see that it is upside down, perhaps it is in shadow. Sometimes sometimes that can be really helpful when you're learning. And the last question for today comes from Micah, and Micah would like to know, what kind of tips would you give to a beginner in tarot journaling? Now, this could definitely be, and I am planning for it to be, a whole video on its own, but I did just kind of want to pull this one in here real quick because I do get a lot of questions about tarot journaling. My biggest piece of advice for beginners in their tarot journal is to do things in a way that works for you. It's wonderful to look at other people's journals for inspiration and to get some ideas, but really when it comes down to it, tarot journaling is supposed to be an extension of your practice. So it needs to work for your tarot practice. And for some people like me, that means really creative exploration on the page, where my tarot journal is almost like an art journal in a sense, because for me, that's an extension of my practice. However, it didn't always used to be that way. When I was first learning tarot and first starting a tarot journal, the main thing was for me to just get the practice down, to get into a routine of journaling. And so I didn't include any pictures or any drawings or anything like that when I first started. All I did was write down my cards and my reflections, because that is the main thing. That's really what you need to focus on. All of the other stuff is extra. Even copying cards and photocopying cards and pasting them into your journal. It's beautiful and it's fun, but that's totally extra. You don't need that to start a tarot journal. So the one piece of advice I would give anybody who's looking to start tarot journaling is to do things in a way that feels comfortable for you. If doing really creative journaling gets your juices flowing and you're really excited about that and that's how you want to do your tarot journal, that's great. But for some people, that can be super overwhelming. Some people just need to just write it down, and that works too. The other thing that I would definitely mention as a big piece of advice is to use a journal that you will actually use. So I cannot tell you how many beautiful journals that I've bought over the years that I'm afraid to write in. I don't do that so much anymore, but I used to really bad. I would buy these gorgeous journals and I'm so afraid to mess them up that I never actually wrote in them. So I have empty journals, and empty journals are just taking up space on my bookshelf. So the second piece of advice is really to get a journal that you feel comfortable working in, a journal that you can write in, and a journal that you can make mistakes in, because you will make mistakes in your tarot journal. It's okay. It's a personal exploration. I make mistakes in mine all the time. I'm just really good at covering them up with paper collaging and washi, right? You just don't see the mistakes that I make. But I do, spelling errors and put the wrong date and do all kinds of stuff like that too. And that's okay. Just know that it's your personal journal, so use it in a way that works for you. I do plan on doing a whole series on tarot journaling, so that is hopefully a series that will be coming out. I'm hoping probably either at the end of this year or beginning of next. So thank you so much for joining me for this first quick Q&A session. If you'd like to leave any questions for me, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will add them to my list. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.